Hi everyone. So a little quick video today where I will discuss the instructions that I've given for the reading responses. Now, this is all of these instructions are contained in a template that I've provided, which I'll show you how to find. The instructions are pretty much the same for both of your reading assignments. So you can just use the same template, the same set of instructions for reflection assignment number one, which is due next Friday, and for the second reflection assignment, which I believe is due on the last day of class. So I'll show you where to find the template and the instructions, and then I will just sort of go over everything so that we're all clear on what the assignment calls for. Right, so first to find the template, you want to click on the course on Brightspace, go to course content, like so. You're going to go all the way down to the bottom to the helpful materials module. And in that module, you'll find the links that I mentioned during our initial lecture and a new addition, which is the assignment template. So you're going to want to download that to your computer. And when you save it, make sure you put your name there. Change the name of the file from your name here to, I don't know, Sally Student or whatever your name is. So that's what you're going to want to do. Right. So once you've got it, you're going to want to fill in all of this information. So your name, your student number, the assignment due date. You can leave this the same. The course code and my name are already there. It says reflection assignment. You'll probably want to write, one or two, and save it so that that's indicated in the file name. So reflection assignment one, change the name of the file. So save as reflection assignment one, draft one, so on and so forth. And then you will find instructions here in each for part one and part two. There's instructions for the references section, and there's even some additional instructions as well as a grading scheme. And that's what we'll look at right now. So for part one, what you want to do is pretty much exactly what it says here. You want to choose something interesting from the readings, from our lectures, or really anything that you deem relevant to the themes and learning of this learning objectives of the class, and then you want to explain it. So as we sort of talked about in the last lecture toward the end, um, this could be an argument. So think of all of the epistemological and metaphysical arguments for substance dualism that Kim considers in chapter 2. You could pick one of those and clearly explain it. You could choose a theory of the mental that we've looked at or one that we have yet to look at. So we've already looked at substance dualism in substantial detail. We've mentioned other philosophical theories like functionalism and identity theory. Next week, we're looking at behaviorism. It is okay if you want to go ahead and choose something that we haven't covered yet, but you'll want to make sure that you read ahead if you decide to do that. So I recommend sticking close to something in chapter one or chapter two of our textbook. Of course, you can pull from outside of the course. A lot of students like to discuss things like thought experiments or like science fiction sort of scenarios. Questions like, could a computer have a mind? Um, uh, stuff like that. That's fine. But if you're pulling from, I don't know, for example, a thought experiment that we haven't looked at in detail, or if you're pulling from a piece of fiction, like, using like an example from Star Trek or something, you have to make sure that you explain at least as much of the theory that we're learning as you are, the piece of media. So it can't just be like, telling me all about Mr. Data from Star Trek: The Next Generation, and then nothing about whether he has a mind and what theories could tell us whether Data in fact has a mind or not, right? It's got to be an even mix of the outside stuff and the stuff that we're covering in the course. And of course, whatever you use, you want to make sure that you cite it. So when in doubt, cite everything use the style guides that are available on Purdue's online writing lab. As I say here, for the instructions in the references section, put your references, your full reference information here. Um, I recommend using APA. You don't have to use APA, but I think it's pretty straightforward and it's a good one to use. If you want to use a different one, that's fine. But make sure full bibliographic information goes here, and then make sure you're using in-text citations for anything that you quote or paraphrase or refer to in this section. So that would be the textbook. Um, if you're using another scholarly source for discussion, make sure that you cite it. If you're talking about a movie or a film or a book, and you're relating something from that piece of media to what we're covering in the course, cite that piece of media. Um, Do not cite my lectures while we're talking about citations. Do not cite my lectures. Cite um, the textbook chapters. Cite other scholarly sources. Cite any media you refer to. Cite journalistic sources. Do not cite my lectures. Now, I recommend that students do this in a sort of dialectical manner. That's why this is divided into two parts. So, this is the they say part of the assignment, as it were, right? If the whole idea here is that you're laying out some idea and then critiquing it or responding to it. So it's like they say, I say. Part one is the they say. So, whatever you're addressing, explain it clearly and simply such that somebody who's intelligent but who is not a philosopher could understand it. So, I am a philosopher. Jack, our teaching assistant, is a philosopher. Pretend we don't know anything about philosophy and explain whatever you're talking about in such a way that we would be able to follow it. Now, part two is where you critique. This is the I say part of the assignment. Now, critique here doesn't necessarily mean you're negatively evaluating what you've decided to discuss. It sometimes might, but it doesn't have to. You could, for example, and I encourage you all to sort of take your cue from what Kim does with those arguments for substance dualism in chapter 2, right? He lays out the argument, premises and conclusions. He explains each of the premises and the conclusion, and then he kind of critiques the premises and explores, well, does this premise work? Um, does this conclusion follow from these premises, etc., right? Um, take that as an example of what you're meant to do in part two. So after you've explained everything in part one, now you're critiquing in part two. But you might not necessarily be trying to target, a particular premise that doesn't work, or you might not be, targeting the conclusion, like maybe I disagree with this conclusion, or it doesn't follow from the premises. No, maybe you want to add something. Maybe, hey, this argument is good, but here's something else that's also good. Here's another reason why we should, adhere to one particular theory over another, right? So critique doesn't necessarily mean that you're criticizing, in that sort of negative colloquial sense of the term. You're, as I say here, exploring the strengths and weaknesses of your chosen idea. You can also draw connections between the discussion in part one or in whatever source you're using and connect it with something else, right? But you get the idea, right? You're laying it out. They say, I say. Particularly important for part two. You'll want to analyze the ideas. You'll want to maybe provide some counter examples. This is how philosophers argue. And I know that, not all of these are going to be perfect, and that's okay. This is an exercise in doing this sort of work, kind of like to prepare you for the essay, really. The total length that you're aiming for is about 750 words, and that includes parts one and two. It does not include any of this information here. It does not include your references section. So the body of parts one and two should add up to about 750 words. You can go a little bit over that as long as there's no unnecessary repetition, but don't go under it or substantially under it. So if you hand in a reflection assignment that's only 400 words, that's probably going to be an F because it's an incomplete assignment. It doesn't hit the word count. Some additional things to keep in mind. Delete all these instructions before you submit. Don't leave this here, for example. Don't leave these instructions here. Delete those. Make sure that they are not there in your final draft. Save your copies as you proceed. Remember, you need to submit proof of work for this assignment. So you need, for the reading responses, you need at least 2 early drafts. You can do more if you want, but at least 2 early drafts plus the final. Clearly indicate which is which. Save them as you go. Use the Save As feature. Reflection assignment number 1 by Sally Student, draft 1, draft 2, final draft, etc. If you fail to submit the proof of work, I will not mark your assignment and you will get a 0. And these drafts have to clearly show the progress you've made. Some people do this differently. Some people write the whole thing all in one shot and then go back and edit it a few times. That's fine. Some people might write part one and for draft one and part two in draft two, and then the final draft would be like an edited, proofread, finalized version. That's fine as well. Some of you may have different writing styles, right? Some of you might write more like the analytic philosophers, some more like the continental philosophers. Those are fine. Some of you might engage in a little bit of storytelling, using a kind of narrative voice. That's fine too. In fact, I want your work to sound like it was written by a human, right? I don't want you to sound like you're a robot or something. We don't want to all start sounding like ChatGPT here. So write with your own style, with your own voice. Just make sure that you're not making any mistakes, like misspelled words, problems with grammar, poorly formed sentences, problems with punctuation, right? Make sure that you're not doing any of that. And make sure that you're using some of what we've learned so far. I know we haven't got too far into the material, but by the time this is due, we'll have done an overview of the field of philosophy of mind, dualism, and behaviorism. So there'll be lots to draw from. Okay, here's a little grading scheme that I want you all to keep in mind. And this is what I follow when I evaluate your work. This is what Jack will follow. Basically, an assignment that fails is incomplete. So it's way too short. There's no proof of work, or you just didn't do it. Um, that's a failure. You might fail if you fail to meet the following objectives too, which I'll outline now. But that's an F. It's almost like, to get an F on this assignment, you almost kind of have to try to get an F, right? Again, by either neglecting your proof of work or by doing something that's too short or which fails to meet the objectives of the assignment, or by just not doing it at all. Um, what about the other ranges? Well, Carlton's letter grades are based on a sort of distribution of number grade marks. So marks in the D range go from 50 to 59. And within that range is obviously D minus, D, and D plus. And it's the same for the other letter grades. An assignment in the C range is from 60 to 69, in the B range from 70 to 79, in the A range from 80 to 89, and then 80 plus is between 90 and 100. So you'll want to keep that in mind. Of course, you can also find this on the internet if you want to look it up. But what does an assignment in the D range looks like? Well, it might fall pretty short of the word limit. Maybe it's like 500 words instead of 750. Maybe there's a lot of unnecessary repetition. Whatever argumentation is there, whatever analysis is there, is poor in that it contains errors of reasoning. And I'm talking about things like informal fallacies. Maybe there are substantial problems with spelling, grammar, sentence structure, which make everything very unclear. It might use non-scholarly language, like everyday vernacular, instead of proper scholarly language. Like you want to write like how our textbook sounds, um, or not exactly. You don't have to write exactly like Kim does, but you want to preserve a sort of formal academic tone. You don't want to write the way you would talk to your friends or compose a text to your friends, right? You want to be using proper scholarly language. Paragraphs should be used properly. Every paragraph has a job to do. Every paragraph should have sort of like a discrete topic. So one giant paragraph or paragraphs that are like too short, we don't want to see any of that. Um, if you fail to use sources or you only use non-scholarly sources, or if you don't cite your sources properly, I understand the difference between outright plagiarism and improper citation, but I am starting to come down a lot harder on improper citation. I won't send you to the dean's office for academic misconduct, but it is important that you cite things and that you do it properly. So if you're not citing things properly and or using non-scholarly sources, that's not going to be good. Um, you want to demonstrate that you understand the terms, the theories, and concepts that we've learned about. So if it's evident that there's little understanding of those terms, concepts, and theories, that could be in the D range. So basically, a D range fails to meet a lot of the objectives in a satisfactory way. Um, an assignment in the C range is just satisfactory. It might fall a little short of the word limit. Maybe there's some unnecessary repetition, maybe a little bit of poor analysis or argumentation. There are some problems with spelling, grammar, sentence structure where I can understand what you're trying to say, but it could be a heck of a lot clearer. Again, it might use non-scholarly language. The paragraphs might be too long or too short. Maybe you've used some scholarly sources, but they're not cited correctly. Maybe you rely on non-scholarly sources. You've cited everything properly, but you're just not using scholarly sources, right? You're using like YouTube videos or something. You don't want to be doing that. You show a satisfactory understanding of terms, theories, and concepts. So, you've done an okay job, right? A C is like an okay job. So you passed, but there's room for a lot of improvement. Assignments that fall into the B range are good. They meet or exceed the word limit. There might be a little bit of repetition, but it's not too bad. Your argument and analysis will be good, but there'll be a little bit of room for improvement. There might be a few errors in your writing, right? Spelling, grammar, sentence structure. Maybe there's the odd thing here or there, but everything's reasonably clear. You use a scholarly sort of tone, right? Whether that's a more analytic or continental style or a more narrative style, you're using the right kind of language. You're not, talking the way you would talk on, like, I don't know, TikTok or something, right? Paragraphs are the proper length. Each paragraph has a job to do. So in this paragraph, you explain this idea. In this paragraph, you explain that idea. In the next paragraph, you critique one of those ideas, etc. Right? Um, it's very clear, but could be a little clearer. Relies on scholarly sources that are more or less cited correctly, and you use the sources in a way that you show me that you understand what those sources are saying. So you're not citing something that says the opposite of what you think it says, right? That's something I would see in the C range or the D range, probably more so the D range. You show a good understanding of the terms, theories, and concepts we've learned about, but again, room for a little improvement. Pretty much you hit all of the objectives of the assignment, but there's room for a little improvement. Like anything in the B range is good, but could be a bit better. Assignments in the A range are excellent. So we're talking A minus to A here. So from 80 to 89. Meets or exceeds the word limit with no unnecessary repetition. Your arguments, your analyses are all sound, all valid and sound. There are no significant issues with spelling, grammar, or sentence structure. There might be a typo here or there, but nothing serious. You use a scholarly sort of tone. Paragraphs are good length, and they're organized in such a way that that your discussion kind of flows nicely. Um, you demonstrate a mastery of the terms, theories, and concepts we've learned so far. Basically, you've nailed everything, and you've done a really good job if you get an A. If you want to get an A plus, do everything you need to do to earn an A, but impress me. And what does that mean? You're like, how do I impress Professor Redstone? Well, what you want to do is generally one of two things. You want to be like highly original, or you want to perform at a level that I would expect from, say, an upper year undergraduate student or a graduate student, which is doable. It is doable. Um, why do I say highly original? Tell me something I don't know. Think of something I haven't thought of and tell me about it. You can impress me that way. If you want to write at the level of an upper year undergraduate or a graduate, you can do it. I've had students working at that level. Um, it takes an eye for detail, and you have to kind of not you have to be unafraid of being critical of yourself, right? You want to be reviewing those drafts and trying to be your own best critic in terms of the explanation, the analysis, the writing, all of it. Try and be your own best critic or be very original, very creative, and you might earn an A plus. Now the Dropbox for this assignment is not yet open, but it will be. I don't know, probably open it up next week. Remember, and I cannot emphasize this enough, remember to submit the required proof of work. At least two early drafts, which show the incremental progress you've made on this assignment, as well as the final draft. You can do more than two drafts if you want, but at the minimum, I want to see two drafts which clearly show the incremental progress of your work. That said, you're all set. You can probably begin. Um, I'm looking forward to reading all of your assignments. And if you have any questions about any of this, please don't be afraid to email me. All right. I'll see you for our next lecture on Wednesday. Take care, everyone.